I never imagined a single hallway could feel so small, so suffocating and yet so explosive. But there I was, stuck, humiliated and completely exposed, while my sister's dream wedding unfolded just beyond the closed doors. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the soft strains of the wedding band. All of it was like a cruel soundtrack to my own private nightmare. Tried to breathe, to shrink into myself, but it was impossible. Every person who passed by seemed to stare, not just at me, but through me. And maybe they were. Maybe everyone could see the chaos building inside me, the mix of anger, embarrassment, and that raw, twisting feeling of betrayal. It wasn't just a bad moment. It was the moment where everything I thought I understood about my sister, my family, and even myself began to unravel. I had come to celebrate her happiness, to smile and cheer and be the supportive sibling. But somehow, in that narrow hallway, all of that evaporated. And then it got worse. I knew there was a choice to make. I could stay, swallow the humiliation, and try to patch it together like nothing happened. Or I could leave, walk out, and risk everything: the family, the wedding, my own sense of loyalty. My heart was racing, my hands shaking, and the whole world felt unbearably small. And yet, even in that moment, I sensed that something bigger was at play. Something no one could have predicted. Something that would turn this wedding, this day, and my entire relationship with my sister upside down. You're probably wondering, what happened next? Trust me, so was I. But before I could even process what was happening, the hallway closed in tighter, the whispers grew louder, and I realized there was no going back. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was the beginning of a story so chaotic, so shocking that it would haunt the wedding forever and change everything. To understand how I ended up trapped in that narrow hallway, humiliated and frozen in place, you need to know a little about my family and my sister. She's always been the golden child, the one everyone noticed, admired, and adored. I, on the other hand, have always hovered in the background. Not invisible exactly, but more like a supporting character in the grand narrative of her life. The weeks leading up to her wedding were tense, to say the least. There was excitement. Of course, endless lists of flowers, dresses, and seating charts. But also subtle undercurrents I hadn't fully registered. Family politics, unspoken rivalries, and the quiet pressure to behave perfectly weighed on me like an invisible chain. I tried to prepare myself mentally, telling myself, just smile, be there for her, and don't rock the boat. Easy words, harder to follow when reality hits. That morning, I woke up with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The house buzzed with activity, my sister surrounded by bridesmaids, mother fussing over linens, and relatives streaming in with unsolicited advice. I tried to ground myself, to remember why I was there. I was her sibling, after all. I was supposed to be part of her happiest day. But even as I smiled at the camera and complimented her dress, a subtle unease nagged at the edge of my thoughts. Something felt off. Family dynamics, as I've learned over the years, are like strings stretched across a web, tight in some places, loose in others. And weddings? Weddings pull on every single string at once. I wasn't ready for the way tensions would explode, or for how quickly admiration could turn to judgment, support to scrutiny. By the time we arrived at the venue, I could feel the energy shift. Guests buzzing, laughter echoing in the grand hall, and my sister glowing with excitement. I wanted to be happy for her. I truly did. But as soon as we stepped into the building, small things began to pile up. Comments that stung, glances that cut deeper than words, and a growing sense that I didn't quite belong here. I told myself to ignore it. I told myself to stay strong. But deep down, I knew the day was already tipping toward chaos. And the hallway, that narrow, inescapable hallway, that was where everything would finally collide. It all happened in a heartbeat. Yet it felt like hours. One moment, I was walking through the hallway toward the reception hall, trying to blend in, trying to keep my composure. The next, I was trapped, caught in a spotlight of embarrassment that seemed to amplify every misstep I had ever made. It started small. I whispered comment from a cousin I barely liked, just loud enough for me to hear. I laughed it off, forcing a smile, but the words lingered. And then another remark, this one sharper, this one more personal, slicing through my confidence like a knife. I froze, unsure whether to confront it or retreat. The hallway was deceptively narrow, lined with mirrors and polished floors. Every reflection seemed to mock me, echoing my growing humiliation. I tried to steady myself, adjusting my outfit, brushing imaginary lint from my shoulder, anything to regain a sense of control. But control was slipping fast. Then came the trip. Yes, a literal humiliating trip. My heel caught on the edge of a rug, and suddenly I was flailing, arms outstretched, trying desperately to regain balance. A guest gasped. A phone camera flashed. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on me, each one silently recording my failure. Before I could recover, my sister appeared at the end of the hallway, radiant in her wedding gown, glowing as if nothing could ever touch her. And yet, in that moment, I saw the tiniest flicker in her eyes, a mixture of surprise and awkwardness because she hadn't expected me to falter so publicly. That tiny crack in her perfect day made my humiliation feel even sharper. Words began to fly, snide comments, helpful advice from distant relatives, and my own internal monologue screaming louder than any voice around me. Stay calm, act normal, smile. But my face had betrayed me. My cheeks burned, my throat felt tight, and I realized that nothing I did would erase the memory of this moment for anyone who had seen. And then, of course, the whispers started. Quiet at first, almost polite, but growing louder as more people noticed. My heart pounded against my ribs. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the hallway itself had turned into a trap. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the walls, to be anywhere but there. It was humiliation in its purest form. Public, inescapable, and relentless. But it wasn't just about me. Somehow in this tiny, cruel hallway, I could feel the tension radiating outward, threatening to touch everyone else, even my sister. The perfect day I had come to celebrate was unraveling, thread by thread, and I was the unwilling catalyst. By the time I realized I could no longer endure it, my mind had made a decision, a choice that would shock my family, my sister, and perhaps even me. I couldn't stay. I couldn't participate. I couldn't let this hallway define my worth or ruin mine or anyone else's day. As I stood there in that hallway, the humiliation wasn't just sitting on my shoulders. It was sinking into my bones. I could feel it spreading, tightening, becoming something bigger than embarrassment. It was morphing into an emotional whirlwind I couldn't outrun. Anger, shame, confusion. They collided inside me like waves crashing against each other with no rhythm, no pause, no mercy. The anger came first, hot, sharp, and immediate. I was angry at the whispers, at the judgmental eyes, at the people who had been waiting for an opportunity to see me crack. I could feel the sting of every snide word, every sideways glance. I was angry that no one stepped in. No one softened the moment. No one tried to shield me from the storm. It felt like the whole hallway was built to amplify that anger, bouncing it off its walls and pushing it right back into my chest. But anger never travels alone. Soon, shame crept in with its quiet, suffocating grip. Shame is heavier than anger. It makes you fold inward, question every move, replay every mistake. I felt small, insignificant, like a background character who had accidentally wandered into the spotlight and ruined the scene. My cheeks burned, my hands shook, and I wondered if maybe everyone had always seen me this way. Maybe I had only just realized it. And then came the fear. The fear of confrontation, the fear of confirming people's worst assumptions about me, the fear of making the day harder for my sister, even unintentionally. I kept thinking, if I speak up, I'll be dramatic. If I stay silent, I'll be weak. It felt like every path was the wrong one. My heart pounded louder than the music echoing from inside the reception hall. I could hear laughter behind the closed doors, light and joyful, completely at odds with the storm raging inside me. The contrast was painful. Their celebration felt like salt in my wounds, reminding me that while they danced and toasted, I was drowning in my own thoughts. I tried to talk myself down, to breathe slowly and remind myself that this moment didn't define me. But it's hard to reason with your emotions when they've reached a boiling point. Every attempt to calm myself ended with another wave of self-doubt washing over me. The worst part wasn't the incident itself. It was the isolation that followed. Standing in that hallway, surrounded by people yet feeling utterly alone, I realized how easy it is to get lost in your own mind. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, like a tunnel built from every insecurity I'd ever tried to bury. I didn't know it yet. But this emotional spiral would lead me to make a decision that would shock everyone. A decision born not from anger alone, but from a fragile, desperate need to reclaim even the smallest piece of dignity. The decision didn't come all at once. It crept up slowly, like a shadow stretching across the hallway. One moment, I was frozen in place, drowning in anger, shame, and fear. The next, something shifted, a quiet, steady voice inside me whispering, "You don't have to stay here." At first, I tried to ignore it. After all, this was my sister's wedding. I was supposed to endure the awkwardness, swallow the humiliation, and smile through it all. That's what family does, right? But as the whispers grew louder and the stares more piercing, I realized something uncomfortable. Enduring this wasn't loyalty, it was self-erasure. I was letting the hallway, the opinions, and the tension define me. And I wasn't willing to let that happen anymore. The act of walking out didn't feel like courage at first. It felt like stepping off a cliff, the unknown stretching ahead of me while every eye followed my move. My legs shook, my chest tightened, and yet every step toward the exit brought a strange sense of relief. For the first time in hours, I was choosing myself over the chaos surrounding me. I could feel the tension as I moved. Some relatives noticed immediately, their faces twisting into expressions I can only describe as shock and confusion. Others whispered among themselves, trying to piece together the audacity of my actions. And then there was my sister, stunned, radiant, and hurt all at once. I could see it in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to leave, and the hallway, for all its humiliation, had suddenly become a stage for my defiance. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was deliberate, steady, almost painfully slow. Step by step, I created space between myself and the moment that had trapped me. Was my sister's reaction. At first, she looked incredulous, then frustrated, and finally, heartbroken. The day she had meticulously planned, the day she had imagined in her mind since childhood, was collapsing in ways she couldn't control. And though my leaving wasn't the cause of everything, it was the catalyst, the moment that turned a series of small mishaps into a full-blown disaster. From the sidelines, I could see it all. Parents rushing, friends trying to salvage decorations, and my sister struggling to maintain composure. And yet, amid the chaos, there was a strange clarity. Life doesn't always go according to plan, no matter how much effort or love is poured into it. Moments of unpredictability can upend perfection, and sometimes, those moments are triggered by choices you never thought would matter. In that hallway, I had felt powerless and humiliated. But here, watching the fallout from a distance, I understood something crucial. Chaos doesn't discriminate. It spares no one and it respects no expectations. My sister's perfect day had been disrupted. Yes. But life, in all its messy unpredictability, was showing its true face. And in that revelation, there was a strange, almost bitter sort of clarity. The twist wasn't just about my exit or the accidents that followed. It was about perspective, about realizing that even when things seem ruined, even when humiliation and disaster strike, life continues. And sometimes the moments that feel like the worst possible outcomes carry lessons deeper than any carefully planned celebration could teach. Looking back, that hallway feels both like a trap and a turning point. It was where humiliation struck hardest, where embarrassment seemed inescapable, and yet it was also where I discovered an inner strength I hadn't known existed. Walking away wasn't just leaving a space, it was reclaiming a piece of myself. A quiet assertion that my dignity mattered, even in the most public and uncomfortable moments. Life doesn't hand us instruction, manuals for chaos. Weddings, family gatherings, career milestones. They all carry the potential for perfection and disaster. The hallway was my lesson in embracing imperfection, in understanding that even when things spiral out of control, we still have the power to choose our responses. We can be passive victims of circumstance, or we can act, even imperfectly, to honor our values and our truth. I won't pretend it was easy. I faced judgment, confusion, and guilt. I worried about my sister, about our family, about how this day would be remembered. And yet, amid all the tension, I realized something powerful. Life isn't defined by a single moment of humiliation, a single mistake, or even a single exit. Life is defined by resilience, courage, and the ability to move forward, even when the world seems chaotic. So, the next time you feel trapped, embarrassed, or overwhelmed, whether by a hallway, a situation, or the judgment of others, remember that it's okay to step back, to protect yourself, and to reclaim your dignity. Growth often emerges from the most uncomfortable spaces, and clarity often comes from the moments we least expect. That hallway, that moment of humiliation, and even the chaos that followed became part of a bigger story. A story about courage, perspective, and the human capacity to rise above even the most challenging circumstances. In the end, the lesson wasn't just about surviving embarrassment, it was about finding peace, strength, and grace amid the unpredictability of life.